How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf 9 of Masechta Kiddushin. Friends. Yo, friends. Yo, friends. Yo, friends. Yo, friends. I'm exhausted. I just got off of like a 2-hour call or something. Boy, am I exhausted. But you know what? The Eibishter's Torah is going to light me up. You can see I'm not going to be exhausted. I'm not going to be exhausted in a minute. I'm going to be fired up. That's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be fired up. That's what I'm going to be. Alright, well, we already did like half an Amud, I think, on Babylon. Rabbi Yisrael. Okay, Rabbi Yisrael, come on, Rabbi Yisrael, we need you over here. We need you over here. We need you. It's such an important part of the Babylon Talmud shenanigans. Anyways, alright, anyways, yeah, it's an interesting daf if I remember correctly. Don't worry, I prepared it, I reviewed it, don't worry, but I reviewed it a few hours ago, but then, yeah, I had this call. But it's an interesting daf, I think. It talks about Kiddushin, you know what I mean? Alright, let's just get started. Alright, we're on daf Tesamud Aleph. About 5 lines before it gets wide at the 2 dots. Taner Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, B'shtar Ketzad. So how does it work to be Mekadesh a fellow with a shtar? Kasav lo alanir or alacheres. If the fellow writes on paper or on pottery, afalpi she'embo shavet puta, even though the paper or the pottery is not worth the shavet puta, but that's okay. Bitchem mukudeshes li, bitchem oreses li. Oy, Babylon, but that was barely even a Babylon. Bitchem oreses li, bitchem li into. Oh, so if he writes on this paper, on the pottery, that assuming that she's a katana or a naira, and he writes to the father, Bitchem mekudeshesli, your daughter is mekudeshes to me. Bitchem oresesli, your daughter is engaged to me. Bitcha li into, your daughter is for me a wife. Any of these things, any of these lashonis were fine. Maskef lo Bzeire bar mamul. So Bzeire bar mamul takasa kasha. What's the kasha? Halo dami hayshtar lishtar zabine. So it's an interesting question. It's Yisodis Dika Kasha. That how does a shtar normally work? Shimon sells his field to Ruvain. So who writes the shtar? Shimon, the seller, the one being Makne, writes the shtar to the one being Kona. Shimon writes to Ruvain, I'm selling you my field. He gives the shtar to Ruvain, and now if anybody comes to Ruvain and says, Ruvain, what are you doing there? It's Shimon's field. He shows them a shtar. No, Shimon was Makne's field to me. Yet over here it's fakert. Who's the one being Makne? The father, right? If his daughter's a katana or a naira, the father is the one being Makne to this fellow. And yet, right, when it comes to the field, Shimon, the one being Makne, writes the shtar to Ruvain, the one being Kone. So I would think that over here, the father, who's being Makne's daughter, would write the shtar and give it to the fellow who's being Kona, the daughter. But nisht, fakert. The husband, the fellow who's being Kona, writes the shtar and gives it to the Makne, the father. So therefore, right, so maskef lo Reb Zeir bar Mamul asakasha, halo dami hayshtar l'shtar zabine. That this shtar of Kiddushin is the opposite of a shtar if somebody's selling his field. When it comes to the field, it's the seller who writes to the buyer that my field is sold to you. But over here it's fakert. Baal, the husband, who's the one being kone, kosev, bitcha mikudeshes li, your daughter is mikudeshes to me, and he gives it to the makne, he gives it to the father. So, and for Rave, that, well, we got to rely on the psukim. Dartin, when it comes to the field, it's based on a pasuk, and over here by Kiddushin it's based on a pasuk. Hasam, when it comes to the field, ksiv umacher me'achuza asoi. It says that if a fellow sells from his inheritance, so that he's selling, so bimbocher taler achmon. So the Torah is putting the emphasis on the seller, and therefore the seller is the one who writes the document. Hacha ksiv ki yikach. But over here by Kiddushin it says ki yikach. Bibal taler achmona. The pasuk is putting the emphasis on the yikach, on the taker, on the baal. Therefore, it's the husband who writes the shtar. But fekti gemara hasam nami. But also by the field ksiv it says sados bakesef yiknu. Oh, you hear the kasha? By field also it says that you will purchase fields with money. So yiknu, it says yiknu. So when it comes to Kiddushin, we're saying, well, yikach, because it says yikach, therefore it's the Baal who's the one who writes the shtar. But actually by a field also it says yiknu, and therefore I would think that it's the koneh who should write the shtar, yet that's not true. We see it's the mocher who writes the shtar. So kribe yaknu. So be right darshan it not sados bakesev yiknu, but sados bakesev yaknu. That the emphasis is on the makne, is on the seller. But my time is akaris be yaknu. But one second, how come you kind of made a drasha and said don't read it yiknu, read it yaknu, that it's the seller who writes the document? Mishum dichsiv umacher. Is it because the pasuk says umacher, that the initial pasuk said umacher me'achuzaso, that he sells, that the emphasis is on the seller? But kri be ki yakach. But then why don't we also, just like we said by the field sados bakesef, not yiknu but yaknu, so why don't we make a drasha oichit when it comes to Kiddushin, not ki yikach ish isha but ki yakach makne, that it's the father who writes the document dichsivs, because after all we know that the puzzle says by motzi shemer as biti nosati laish hazeh, that right, I gave my daughter to this fellow. So we see also, I can make the argument that by Kiddushin Oichit, it should be from the perspective of the father. That right, it says, as biti nosati lishazeh, a father gives his daughter for Kiddushin, and therefore we shouldn't read a ki yikach, we should read a ki yakach. That is from the perspective of the makne, of the father. And the father should write the document, not the husband. So Elo Amar Rava says, you know what, forget about the psukim. Too complicated. Hilchasa ninuvas mechinu rabbanan akroi. It says, Rava, it's halach l'Moshe misinai. It's halach l'Moshe misinai. It's halach l'Moshe misinai that a fellow writes a shtar kiddushin and gives it to the father of the fellow. And it's halach l'Moshe misinai that when you sell a field, it's the seller who writes the document and gives it to the buyer. It's halach l'Moshe misinai, right? It's halach from Moses at Mount Sinai. And these psukim that we're bringing are just asmachtas. We're kind of finding psukim that we can kind of attach to these already predetermined halachas. But the halacha is not coming from the pasuk; it's coming from the fact that it comes from Moses at Sinai. By same alternatively, hasam nami ksiv vo'ekach es sefer hamikne. Alternatively, also over there in Yirmiyah, when the pasuk talks about when Yirmiyah bought a field from Hanamel, it says, Va'ekach es sefer mikneh, that I, the buyer, am the one who took the document. So we see that it's the seller who gives the document to the buyer. Alright, nice stuff. V'amar Rav says Rav, Amar Rav Nachman says Rav Nachman. Kosav lo ala niyar or al cheres, if a fellow writes on a paper or on a pottery, afal pi she'ein bo shaveh pruta, even though it is less than a pruta, bitcha mikudeshes li, bitcha meoreses li, bitcha li into, right? So he bets writes a shtar kiddushin. Bein al yedei avia, bein al yedei atzma mikudeshes. Whether her father accepts the document, whether she accepts the document, she's mikudeshes midaito v'hu shelo bagra. As long as the father, right? So either the father can accept it on her behalf, the shtar, or she can accept it on her behalf, as long as the father, said, okay, accept accept this document, right? Because she's not yet a bogeris. But kosav la ala niyar or ala cheres, if he writes a document on a paper or on pottery, afal pisha ein bo shaveh pruta, even though it's less than a shaveh pruta, ariat mekudeshesli, ariat lila into, ariat meoresesli, mikudeshes, she is mikudeshes bein aidei avia, whether her father accepts it for her, bein aidei atma, whether she accepts it for herself, midaito, with her own knowledge, vusha bagra, as long as, right, if she's a boger. So if she's a bogeres, she can accept her own shtar kiddushin, or she can ask her father to accept it on her behalf, but it has to be with her knowledge, because she's a bogeres, she handles her own marriage once she's an adult. Boy Reb Shimon ben Lakish asked a kasha, shtar eris in shaksavu shelo lishma mau. Oh, you hear the kasha? We are fresh from Masechta Gittin. Already not so fresh, we're already over a week out of Masechta Gittin, but now we're in Masechta Kiddushin. How's Masechta Kiddushin going? It's going good, right? So Reb Shimon, so Rish Lakish asks a kasha, oh, so we know that by a get, right, v'chosav lo, lishma. Right, you have to write a get lishma. What about the shtar kiddushin? Does a shtar kiddushin have to be written lishma? So shtar eris in shekosvo sheksavo shelo lishma mau. So what happens if you write a shtar kiddushin, but you don't write it lishma? You don't write it for her. Maybe you wrote a shtar kiddushin for another girl. You decided, you know what, forget it. Let me marry this other girl. So you used that shtar kiddushin. You didn't write it for the second person. You wrote it for the first person. Havayos litzios makshinon. So do we say, well, we compare, right? Makish havayos litzio. We compare kiddushin to gittin, and therefore ma yitzia ba'inon lishma, af havayos nami ba'inon lishma. So just like a get gerushin, a shtar gerushin, a get needs to be written lishma. So oichit, a shtar kiddushin needs to be written lishma udim, or perhaps havayos la'adodi makshinon, or perhaps we compare the different types of kiddushin to one another. Havayos la'adodi makshinon ma havayos de kesef lo ba'inon lishma, and just like when a fellow is mekadesh a woman bekesef with money, that coin did not need to be minted with the intention for it to be used for kiddushin. So afavoya dishtar lo b'inyan lishma. So also when you write a document for kiddushin, just like a coin wouldn't need to be minted lishma, so also the document does not need to be written lishma. So the boy or the pashta, after Rish Lakish asked the kasha, he answered it havaya litzia makshinon, that we compare kiddushin to gittin to Amukra v'yotza v'hoisa, because the pasuk says v'yotza mi beisa v'holcha v'hoisa li'ishacher, that we compare havaya li'yitzia, and just like yitzia needs to be the shema, so oichit havaya needs, kiddushin needs to be written lishma if he's mekadesh with the document. Itmar, it was stated ksavu lishma v'shalom idaito. Oh, what if you wrote the document but she didn't yet know? Right? What does that say? Shari, where am I? Shalom idaito kodem aksiva lo nimlach ba. He didn't ask her. And then afterwards he tells her Vikibalto, and she accepts it. Right? So if a fellow, without her knowledge, she writes a document that says Hariyat Mikudeshes Li, and she doesn't yet know that he's planning to do this. So she doesn't know about it when he writes the document. So again, Itmar, it was stated, if he writes the document for her, with her intention, meaning he writes it with her in mind, for her, but v'shalom idaita, she doesn't know about it. Rav of Ravina ami mikudeshes. So Rav and Ravina say it works. Rav Pape, Rav Sherevia ami enim mikudeshes. Whereas Rav Pape and Rav Sherevia say it does not work. Rav Pape says Rav Pape, I will explain their opinion, Rav and Ravina, why they say it does work, and I'll also explain my own opinion why it does not work. I'll explain their reason why, if he writes the shtar kiddushin lishma v'shalom idaito, it works. Where am I? So dichsiv, because the pasuk says v'yotzav v'haiso, that we compare makish havaya litzia, we compare kiddushin to gerushin. Ma'itzia lishma v'shalom idaito, as we know from Masechta gerushin, but as Janine pointed out recently in the Sugi sisters, Janine, who was it? One of the Gaonim, I think, said that even though midoraisa you do not need the consent of the woman to divorce her, but nonetheless you need to. Who was one of the Gaonim made that enactment? But al kopanim midoraisa, a get needs to be written lishma, but it could be against her will. So also by a shtar kiddushin, lishma, right, needs to be lishma, v'shalom midaito, but it does not need to be with her knowledge. And that's why it's kosher according to Rav and Ravina. And it says of Papa, I'll also explain my rationale, so that we compare Kiddushin to Gerushin. Makish avoy litzia, okay? Ma'itzia ba'inon das makne, just like by a get, you need the das of the makne, of the one, right? A fellow, when he gets married, he's kone, and when he gets divorced, he is makne. And therefore, you need the das of the one kind of, selling isn't the right word, but unkoneing, unacquiring. So here also you need the das of the makne, right? The das of the father, or if she's a bogeres herself. But it's easier to understand from the perspective of the father. The father is being makne his daughter to the chosin, and therefore you need the das of the father. So therefore you need the kiddushin to be written, the shtar kiddushin to be written the shema and midaita. When it comes to Kiddushin, you need not just the das of the fellow, but oichet, the das of the fellow. Meisvei. So now the Gemara asks a kasha on Rava's opinion, right? Rava has said that, right, that it can be even Lishma v'shalom midaita is kosher, but we have a kasha. Ein kos v'nshtari erisin v'nisun el midas shnein parampam. That we have a brisa that says that shtari erisin and nisuin must be with the knowledge, right? Shtar kiddushin needs to be with the knowledge of both of them, the fellow and the fella. So my lav shtari erisin v'nisuin mamish. So let's assume that this means literally shtar kiddushin needs to be lishma umidaita, like Rav Papa is saying. Lo shtari psikta. No, it's talking about the tanoim, the tanoim. I don't really know what the tanoim are, honestly. They do it at the chosin's tish, right? The tanoim. I think that's like more like detailed kind of stuff. I think like the ksuba is kind of more like high level stuff, right? It's got the ikar ksuba, right? The mana masayim. It's got the tosefes. It's got the nedunya, kind of the standard stuff. But I think like, who's going to buy the apartment and who's going to do this and who's going to do that. Those are like the tanoim. So that needs the das shneim, right? That needs the fellow and the fella to know about it. And like Rav Gidol Marav, the Amr of Gidol Marav, Kama atanos in levincha kach v'chach. Okay, so how much you giving for your son? This amount. Levitcha kach v'chach. This is how much he's giving for the daughter. Amdu v'kidshu, and then they were, they did kiddushin. Heinin advar maniknim b'amira. These are the things that, maker adin are just acquired verbally. You don't necessarily need to write them down, but if you do, it sounds like, but if you do write them down, so then you would need the das of both parties. Okay, so now this next chunk is going to take us to the end of the daf. Okay, but it's a sizable chunk, but all good. It's not Yevamis. Okay, Uvibia. So we already learned one opinion on this already, but okay, so we say that a fellow could be Mekadesh, a fellow with Bia, Minolan. How do we know this, right? So we already learned from Uva Allah the other day, but now we have a different source. Amr Babao, Amr B'Yochanan, to Amr Krab, Be'ulas Baal. The pasuk says by a fellow who sleeps with a woman who's married, it says Be'ulas Baal. So Melamed Shenaisela Baal al Yidei Be'ila. So Be'ulas Baal means that you could, that through Be'ulas you could become a Baal, that through Bia, that is a valid method of Kiddushin, and you become a husband. Amalei, Reb Zera, L'Rabo, V'Amrila, Rishlakish, L'Reb Yochanan. Ki Ura Zo, Shoshana Rebbe, I don't understand. Rebbe's pshat from the other day wasn't good enough for you. Uve'Allah, Mlamet Sheniknes, Bibia. Rebbe had said that when the pasuk says Uve'Allah, did we learn it from Rebbe the other day? Let's see. Le'el, Daftal Ramabes. Let's see. Uve'Allah, Mlamet. Oh, okay. We don't quote it from Rebbe the other day. It doesn't look like, but that we saw this opinion the other day, right? That Uve'Allah Melamed Sheniknes Bibia. So we learn from Uve'Allah Ki Yikach Ish Isha Uve'Allah. So that is how we learn out that Kiddushin can even be with Bia. So therefore, we saw Rabbi Bose in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that how do you know Kiddushin can be done by Bia? So we learn it out from Be'ulas Baal. Fact the Gemara. Well, I mean, who asked the kasha? Reb Zera, Zavabo. Some say Rish Lakish, Reb Yochanan. What, you have a problem with what Rebbe said that he learns it out from Uv Allah? What's wrong with that? So if it was from there, from Uv Allah, from Ki Yikach Ish Isha Uv Allah, Hava Amina Ad Mekadesh Vader Ba'il. Oh, so I might think that if I only had the pasuk of Ki Yikach Ish Isha Uv Allah, so I might think that you need both. You need Ki Yikach Ish Isha, that's Kesef, right? Kicha Kicha Mistefron, and Uv Allah Bia. You need Kesef and Bia, not Kesef or Bia. So therefore, Kamash Malan, therefore, we have Be'ulas Baal to teach that no, Bia alone is enough and Kesef alone is enough. Maskifla Reb Abba bar Mamel. Oh, so now Frek Reb Abba bar Mamel Akasha. In Cain, Nari Me'orasa de Omar Rachman Beskila Eichim Mishkachasa. You hear the Kasha? The pasuk says that if a fellow sleeps with a Naira HaMe'orasa, a betrothed Naira who is a Besula, so both of them are Chayiv Skila. Each one is Chayiv Skila. Now, the Shaila though is, how is it possible to ever have a Naira HaMe'orasa who's also a Besula? If you're saying that Bia, right, that Kesef alone, if you want to suggest, if you want to entertain the thought that Kesef alone does not work, where you'd have to have Kesef and Bia, then how would it even ever be possible to have a situation where you have a Naira Me'orasa who's a Besula? Part of becoming Me'orasa would be Bia. So how would you ever have her as a Besula? Either Akdish, Vader Ba'il, if he was Mekadesh with Kesef, and then they had Bia, and therefore they're engaged, Be'ulahi, but then she's not a Besula anymore, she's a Be'ula. Either Akdish Velo Ba'il, and if he was Mekadesh Bekesef, but they didn't have Bia, well then Lav Klumhu. Well then, Kesef without Bia apparently is nothing. So I don't understand, how could you even entertain the notion that Kesef would have to be along with Bia? If that's the case, then how could the pasuk ever talk about a Naira Me'orasa who's a Besula? Memela, a Naira Me'orasa would be a Be'ula. Right? And right, just to clarify, the pasuk says that if a person who is not her fiance sleeps with a Naira Me'orasa who's a Besula, i.e. she has an affair with somebody else, so then they're both Chayav Skila. So the Shaila is, if you can entertain the notion that you would have to have Kesef and Bia, how could you ever have a Naira Me'orasa who's a Besula? Now I lost the place. I think that I found the place. Amur Rabbanon Kamida Abai. So the rabbis before Abai suggested Mishkachas la Kigon shebe'aleh arus shelo kedarko. Beautiful. So the rabbis explained before Abai, well, I could tell you how you can have a Naira Me'orasa who's a Besula. Well, if her husband had, if when she got engaged, there was Kesef and there was Bia, but it was Shelo Kedarka. It was Poshit Anal Bia. So because it was Shelo Kedarka, so she's betrothed. It's considered, right, Uva Allah. But at the same time, she would still be considered a Besula, and that's why if she has an affair, then they're Chayiv Skila. Amalei Abaye, but Abaye says that's not going to work. If her fiance had Bia with her Shelo Kedarka, she would be a Be'ula. Ad kan lo plige Rebbe v'Rabbanon elo be'acher. We're about to say machlokas between Rebbe and the rabbis about if somebody else sleeps with a Naira Me'orasa, if she Shelo Kedarka, and it's a machlokas if she would be a Be'ula or not. Rebbe says she would be a Be'ula. The rabbis say that she would not be a Be'ula. She would still be a Besula. But that machlokas is only by if somebody else sleeps with her. But if her fiance sleeps with her Shelo Kedarka, everyone would agree that she would be a Be'ula. So it is not a valid answer to say, oh, she's a Naira Me'orasa who's a Besula because her fiance slept with her Shelo Kedarka. If her fiance sleeps with her Shelo Kedarka, she's a Be'ula. Both Rebbe and the rabbis agree that if her fiance sleeps with her shelo kedarka, she is a be'ula. So again, back to the question of how can you have a situation where you have a nar marasa who's still a besula if together with kesef you also need bia. So Mahi, what's this case where we have this machlokus between Rebbe and the rabbis about if somebody else sleeps with a nar marasa shelo kedarka, would she be considered a besula or a be'ula? Titania ba'u aleh yud anoshim. If 10 fellows slept with this nara marasa besula, v'adayin hi besula, but she's still a besula, i.e., all 10 of them slept with her shelo kedarka. Kulan beskila. The Chacham say all of them are beskila because she's still considered a besula. When somebody else sleeps with her who's not her fiance, sleeps with her shelo kedarka, she is still considered a besula. And therefore each one is chayiv skila for sleeping with a nar marasa besula. Rabbi Omer Ani, says Rabbi that my opinion is harishon beskila. The first one is beskila because she's a besula, but bechulin bechenek. The rest of them are chayiv chenek because after the first one sleeps with her shelo kedarka, she's a beula at that point, and therefore you won't be the subsequent fellows will not be chayiv for nar marasa besula, but just for a eishes ish, and therefore it would be chenek instead. But we said that machlokas is only by if somebody else sleeps with her, but if her husband, her fiance sleeps with her, then she would be a be'ula. So again, how would you have ever the situation of a nar marasa besula memele? If she's a nar marasa, she's already a be'ula. So Amar Rav Nachman by Yitzchak mishkachas lo kigon shekidsha b'shtar. Oh, so not maybe some of the chevra, maybe some of the very sharp-witted chevra at Babylon Talmud were already thinking this. Well, kesef and bia are only 2 out of 3 modes of kiddushin. There's a third, shtar. You could have a situation where he was mikadesh her with a shtar, and because he was mikadesh with a shtar, no bia is necessary, and now she's engaged, right? It says ki kach ish over Allah, right? So we learn out from, right, that you need kesef and bia, but shtar could be without bia, and shtar could be without bia, and therefore she's still a besula. Just like a shtar alone is able to be a get, so shtar alone is also able to be for kiddushin. Okay, fine, very good. So now Rabbi Yochanan, so what does Rabbi Yochanan do with the pasuk of uv'ala? Right, Rabbi Yochanan learns out bia as a form of kiddushin from Be'ulas Baal. So what does he learn from uv'ala? So ahumi baile zo niknes bebia ve'en amo ha'ivriya niknes bebia. So Rabbi Yochanan learns out uv'ala to say that specifically by kiddushin it can be affected by bia, but to the exclusion of amo ha'ivriya, that you cannot be kona and amo ha'ivriya via bia, because sakadai techamina, I may have thought to say teisi b'kavachomer mi yivama, that we could bring it from a kavachomer from Yivama. Uma Yivama she'ein niknes bekesef niknes bebia, that a Yivama who cannot be acquired with kesef but can be acquired with bia, zo she'niknes bekesef, and amo ivria who is able to be acquired through kesef, and udin she'niknes bebia, certainly she should be able to be acquired through bia. Therefore, I need uv'ala to say that no, bia only works by kiddushin but not by amo ivria. But the Gemara says, wait, don't try to bring a proof, a kavachomer from Yivama to say that, well, if Yivama is nikne al yidei bia, so then amo ivria should be able to theoretically be niknes al yidei bia. That's not a good comparison, because mali Yivama shekain zekuka ve'omer this. Yivama makes sense that that she could be niknes bebia, because she's already connected to the brother through the kiddushin of the brother, right? Meaning, Sarah was married to Ruvain. Ruvain dies. Now she has to do yibum with Shimon, but she already had done kiddushin with Ruvain, and now on account of the kiddushin that she had with Ruvain, she now does yibum with Shimon. So all that's left really is bia. So that makes sense, but there's no reason to try to compare that to Amma Ivriya. So says the Gemara, Sagadai Techamina, but still I may have thought that by Amma Ivriya bia would work, because it says by an Amma Ivriya that if the master takes another wife, in addition to the Amma Ivriya, I think if he marries her, so Akisha HaKosov La'acheres, that the pasuk is comparing the Amma Ivriya La'acheres to this additional wife. And Ma'acheres Mikani B'Bia, and just like this additional wife, her Kiddushin can be with Bia, so if Amma Ivriya Mikani B'Bia, I might think that would compare it to Amma Ivriya and say Amma Ivriya can also be nicknamed B'Bia. So Kamaj Malan, then no, that an Amma Ivriya can only be nicknamed with Kesef. It says Uv Allah, Davka by Kiddushin, it can be affected by Bia, but not Amma Ivriya. V'Rebbe Aisvara Minale. Now, how does Rebbe know that only in Amma? What's going on out there? How does Rebbe know that only Kiddushin can be Bibia, but not by an Amma Ivriya? Because from Uva Allah, Rebbe learns out that that Kiddushin is Bibia, that you can have Bia for Kiddushin. How does Rebbe learn out to the exclusion of Amma Ivriya? So Imkein Lichtov Rachmana Uva Al. My Uva Allah Shmamina Tarti. If Uva Allah was only coming to teach that Kiddushin can be affected via Bia, so it would say Uva Al. What's Uva Allah? It's to teach not just that Kiddushin can be affected via Bia, but Oichit that not just that Kiddushin can be affected via Bia, but Oichit that only Kiddushin, not Amma Ivriya. Now, Ravid de Amar. Now, what about according to Rava, who says Barahina Asber Ali? That Barahina explained to me, what does it mean that when a fellow gets betrothed and he has Bia, Kiddushin Amasurin Levia, Havu Kiddushin, that only Kiddushin that could ultimately result in Bia is a valid Kiddushin. Kiddushin She'en Masurin Levia Lo Havu Kiddushin, but Kiddushin that would be impossible to result in Bia are not good Kiddushin. Rashi points out that could be, for example, if you're just Mekadesh one of two sisters, and you're not sure which one, you can't just choose either one, because maybe it's Ashes, Achosisha, right? And therefore, the Kiddushin essentially can't lead to Bia, because you can't be with them in that case. So therefore, it's not valid Kiddushin, right? In order for Kiddushin to be valid, it has to be Kiddushin that could ultimately lead to Bia. And that's so now from Hikachish Isha Uva Allah. So if that's the case, Ma'ika Lememar, right? So then how do you know this drasha as well, right? How do you know all of these things? Right? Rashi had pointed out, so if that's the case, then how do we know, like Rebbe, wait, what? Man, right, it's so technical because you have so many things in this one word. Wait, so minale ha, so how does Rava know, Tidarshina le, that which we darshan the Rebbe, like Rebbe, v'limute Amma. Okay, fine. So if you say that Uva Allah is teaching that it has to lead, Kiddushin has to be able to lead to Bia. So then how do you know also the drashas that Bia is possible as well as, so according to Rebbe, so according to Rebbe, who says that from Uva Allah you learn out that there's Bia by Kiddushin, and it also comes to exclude Amma Ivriya, and we're saying that we also learn out that it has to be Kiddushin that leads to Bia. So how do you learn out all three of these things? So, Haimi Baile, where am I? Where am I? So, if it was coming to teach that it could be either Kesef or Bia, as well as to the exclusion of the Amr Ivriya, and that was it, so then it would say, oh, Be'Allah. My Uva Allah. What does it mean? Uva Allah instead of Ove Allah. Shmamina Kulu, it teaches all three of these things. From Uva Allah instead of Ove Allah, so it teaches that Bia is possible for Kiddushin. It teaches that specifically by Kiddushin, not by Amma Ivriya, and also teaches that it needs to be Kiddushin that can lead to Bia. Okay, fine. V'Rebbe Haibulas Baal Mayovle. So now what does Rebbe do with Bulas Baal? Right? Because Rebbe learns out from Uva Allah that Kiddushin can be via Bia. So what does he learn out with from Bulas Baal, which is where Rabbi Yochanan learns out that Kiddushin can be via Bia. So what does Rebbe do with the pasuk of Be'ulas Baal. So Haimi Boile Baal Osa Be'ula Shelo Kedarka, that specifically it's the husband who makes her a Be'ula if he sleeps with her Shelo Kedarka, right? Be'ulas Baal, she's a Be'ula if she's Shelo Kedarka with her husband, Vein Acher Osa Be'ula Shelo Kedarka, but somebody else who sleeps with her Shelo Kedarka would not make her a Be'ula. The Rebbe I swear, but 1 second. Does Rebbe really hold this way? We learned fakert a few minutes ago, right? Rebbe was the one who said that if 10 people sleep with this Nari Marasu who's a Besula, only the first will be Chayiv Skila, because the first one, she's a Besula, but after that, she's already a Be'ula, even if she's somebody, even though it's not her fiance. So we see that somebody who's not her fiance is able to make her a Be'ula Shelo Kedarka, not just her husband. Vatani, we learn in the Brisa, if 10 people have Bia Shelo Kedarka with a Nara Amorosa, a Besula, Vadaini Besula, and she's still a Besula because it was Shelo Kedarka, Kulam Beskila, all of them are Chayiv Skila. Rebbe Omer Ani Arishon Beskila, Bechulam Bechenek, that only the first one's Chayiv Skila, but the rest of them are Chayiv Chenek, because she's already a Be'ula for the rest of the people. So we see that this other person who's not her fiance is able to make her a Be'ula, not just her fiance. So Amr B'Zera Mo de Rebbe L'Inyan Knas Techulu Mishalme. Look, when it comes to the punishment, right, Chenek versus Skila, so there Rebbe says that also this other person is able to make her a Be'ula. When it comes to Knas, so for example, if you have just Stam, a Besula who is not engaged or anything, and these people sleep with her, and the question is in terms of a fine for sleeping with a Besula, there's a fine of was it 50 shekels. So that it doesn't. So in that case, if these other people sleep with her, if 10 people sleep with her, all of them would be chayiv a fine, because she would not be considered a be'ula in that case. Only a fiance can make her a be'ula, but not anybody else. So therefore, in a situation where she's not engaged and she's a besula, and these people sleep with her, and onus mufata has a fine of 50 shekels. So in that case, even if it's shelo kedarka, so if it's shelo kedarka, even 10 people, she would be considered a besula from all of them, and they would all be chayiv to pay the 50 shekels. Okay. Ma'ishna miktala. How come by capital punishment, Rebbe says that even other people could make her a be'ula, but when it comes to the fines, she would be considered a besula from all these other people. So shiny awesome, it's different when it comes to capital punishment. Amar Kra, because the pasuk says umeis ha'ish asher shochav ima levada, that only the fellow, right, it says levado, only that person, right, levado, only him. Meaning, if you have 10 people, so only the first one would be chayiv skila, but the rest would be chayiv chenek. V'rabbanan, the rabbis who argue on Rebbe and say that all of them would be chayiv skila. So, hi levado my avdi lei. What do they do with levado? The word levado mi ba'y lehu. They need that pasuk they need levado l'chidetanis within the brisa umesu gam shneim, that both of them will die. Ad sheyu shavin ke'echad, that they both have to be adults by the Naira Marasa. Divi Reb Oshai, that's Reb Oshai's opinion. Reb Yonasan Omer says, Reb Yonasan umeisa ish asher shachav ima levado, that the person who sleeps with her will get skila alone, i.e. if he is a gadol and she's a ketana, so then only he will get skila, and that is what they learn out from levado. Reb Yochanan hay svara minale, and how does Reb Yochanan know that that only the husband can make her a be'ula, right? Rebbe learns it out from Be'ulas Baal. Rabbi Yochanan learns Be'ulas Baal to say that Bia works for Kiddushin. So how does he know that only the husband makes her Be'ula Shelo Kedarka, not other people? Imke Nichtov Kra Be'ulas Ish. Because if it was only coming to teach about Bia by Kiddushin, it would say Be'ulas Ish, my Be'ulas Baal, Shmamina Tarte. What does Be'ulas Baal teach us? It teaches us both that Bia is a valid form of Kiddushin, but also that the fiance, the husband, makes her a be'ula shelo kedarka, but not anybody else. Friends, that was the Tes of Masechta Kiddushin. Wow, we learned a whole bunch of stuff. We talked about Kiddushin Bishtar, which was kind of interesting. We talked about how the shtar Kiddushin needs to be the Shema as well as Midaita. We discussed the shtickle, the difference with the concept of Tanoim, which is interesting. And then we talked about different ways of learning out that Kiddushin could be affected by Bia. We saw the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan that it's from Be'ulas Baal, and then we saw the opinion of Rebbe, which we had seen the other day, which is from the pasuk of Uv Allah. Friends, that was the Daf Tes of Masechta Kiddushin. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.